Hunted in America, which is spectacular and out on the 1st of November from Dangerous Books. This is an opportunity for us to get to know you a little better and understand the woman behind the book and the woman behind what has been a cultural phenomenon. You know, Pamela Geller, you keep hearing about progressive media, or the mainstream media rather. You'll hear this woman reported about in ways that don't quite add up, things that don't make sense. Conservative movement is in love with you. They absolutely adore you. But I've never really heard an interview trying to get to the heart of who you are. There's lots of focus on what you do and the great courageous things that you do in public and your activism, your, whether it's warfare, lawfare, or whatever else. You know, you have this great, extraordinary resilience and bravery in your public life. But I want to take this opportunity to get to know you a little better. Now, in the book, you talk about your political awakening, and you have, as all great heroes and villains do, the perfect origin story. And your origin story is, it starts with 9/11, as I suppose many people, particularly New Yorkers, political awakenings must have. Talk to us a little bit about what your life was like, what you were like before 9/11, before you saw that thing happen in your town.
Well, I was really apolitical, Milo. I loved my fashion, I loved my art, I loved my job, I loved my life. I loved my romantic life. I lived in the greatest country in the world. How special I felt just to be an American in the 20th century. And it was an extraordinary, in its freedom, which of course I didn't even understand at the time.
Right.
To grow up in this...
You took it for granted.
Yes, I took it for granted. I was one of 4 girls. 2 of my sisters are doctors. I mean, we grew up, there was nothing we couldn't do. I mean, all this nonsense now about women being kept down. I'm talking 20, 30, 40 years ago. We had, this perspective that we could do anything that we wanted. And I was the associate publisher of the New York Observer. It was a small upstart newspaper, which was later, interestingly enough, purchased by Jared Kushner.
With the results we've all seen.
Yes, with the results, which speaks for itself.
It used to be so great. It was so great.
It was an interesting paper. I mean, the editorial decisions were interesting, not endorsing Dinkins and yet not endorsing Giuliani. It was an interesting place to be, but largely, I was apolitical. I was living. I was living a free life, not even thinking that was in any way, shape, or form extraordinary. Yeah. But of course now, in hindsight, and in a look at history, it was an extraordinary existence. And I think that's why, with 9/11, I became so activated, because what I was seeking to do was to save that, not just for me. I've lived my life, not just for me.
Well, not yet.
Well, I lived a free life, and I know what it means. I know what it is to be free. And I would say that the majority of people across the world do not. So I know what I'm fighting for. And it's the reason why, Milo, I fight so hard. Because I know.
How abrupt was that change? Were you sort of aware of jihadism, of political Islam, of what was happening in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world before it kind of came home to you? Or did you just sort of wake up and say, who was that, what happened, and everything changed? Was there a sort of bubbling up, or was it really like a Damascene conversion?
There was really no deep knowledge at all of Islam. I knew it as I knew Hinduism, Buddhism, Church of Scientology, Wiccanism, paganism. I mean, it was a belief.
I love the Wicca.
It was a belief system.
They're my favorite Trump protesters, by the way. The witches.
Yes, of course.
Who put hexes on. I love them.
They have little dolls too.
Yeah. No, I love their pluckiness. I love their spirit.
Their scrappiness.
No, they don't care what anybody thinks.
They believe in what they believe.
And I think it's kind of awesome, actually.
And I
like
believe
them.
if they're not hurting anybody, all the power to them.
And that's the difference between them and, let's say, for instance, Yvette Falaka, who I also have a grudging appreciation, not grudging even, just a sort of secret appreciation for. She's the key figure in By Any Means Necessary in Berkeley. Now, I don't, she does want harm to other people. She's happy to go on Tucker Carlson and say that she's glad that speeches get shut down. She's happy to advocate for violence as a response to political ideas, to people she doesn't like. But you sort of have to admire her when you see her. There's this like just 5'2" teacher saying, "Yes, we shut him down and we do it again, and I don't mind beating these people up." There's something nice about that sort of plucky resolve.
Yeah, I find her repulsive.
Of course,
but you know,
if I can't help it. I just think she's kind of fabulous.
Well, you know, and the thing is, she is attractive.
I'm sure she'd hate that.
Yes, she would despise it.
That's why I told Newsweek when they asked me for quotes about her. I said, "Are you kidding? I think she's fantastic. I'm her biggest fan." Anyway,
that's great.
There's something cute about them, but there's something, if you don't mind me saying so, quite grand about you. There's something heroic about you, I think. And as I say, it's a consequence of that hero or supervillain, depending on your perspective on Pamela Geller. It's a consequence of that dramatic origin story.
Yeah, I mean, it's awfully good of you to say that. I never set out to do anything like that.
I'm sure you don't see yourself that way.
But I
think a lot of people do.
It was a visceral reaction.
Okay.
You know, I did not know who had attacked the country on 9/11. I felt guilty about that, Milo.
Were you there?
No, I was on a dock watching from the South Shore of Long Island. And
so you were close enough to see it in real life.
Anyone within 25 miles could see it. It was that, you know, spectacular in the most evil way. And I couldn't imagine.
There was a sort of sick beauty about it, if you like. That kind of beauty is the wrong word, but spectacular is the right word.
It was
There's
a spectacular
sort of
attack.
Extraordinary moment in history and culture and society. The evil audaciousness of it, and just the visuals of it.
And it wasn't just, I mean, here it was the financial center of in my opinion, the capital of the world, New York. The World Trade Center had its own zip code.
Right.
At any one time, there were over 50,000 people there. I mean, the intent, when I say spectacular, the intent of the monstrosity that they sought to inflict on us. And at the same time, you had the Pentagon attack, the military headquarters of the United States. And of course, now we know it was either the Capitol or the White House on Flight 93. The first truly American reaction were the passengers on Flight 93. So it was important that I understand who had attacked my country and why. And that's how I set about to study and learn about Islam.
Let me ask you about that. You are, on this subject, an autodidact.
Yes.
You have taken yourself from, as you said, you know, you're working in media, so you were smart and you were well-read, and you were obviously very culturally conscious, you know, interested in fashion and art and music and literature and so on. But in this specific respect, in religion and politics, let's say, you have educated yourself, you know, far in excess of a lot of university professors on this subject. You have learned everything there is to learn about this, and your perspective, it comes from, seems to me, from reading the book and from listening to you in interviews, your perspective comes from a deep grounding in fact and knowledge, you know, from your reading. How did you go about working out what to read on this subject? Because I know that you've told the story before that somebody just sort of said, "Stop blogging, just do it." But you know, you don't come across like a blogger, even one who's been in the game for a long time, because you have this sort of deep hinterland of knowledge about, you know, complexities and subtleties of the religion itself. An incredible body of knowledge about political Islam, history, you know, culture, society. Where did that come from, and how did you work out what to read and who to talk to educate yourself after this experience you had?
Well, of course, you go to the go-tos. You go to the Daniel Pipeses. You go to the the Bernard Lewises, and you read their work. And after a while, it doesn't make sense. Daniel Pipes doesn't make sense. Moderate Islam, there is no moderate Islam. And not because the president of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, said to President Obama, there is no extreme Islam, there is no moderate Islam.
What is it, Islam practiced properly or not?
Islam
like
is
that, right?
Islam, yes.
Yeah.
And then, you know, as you read further, for example, I know Bernard Lewis is, you know, the academic's academic in terms of Islam, but the way he glossed over the persecution of Christians and Jews under Dhimitude, which is a subclass status for religious minorities, people of the book, that is Christians and Jews, under Islam, it wasn't correct. It didn't reflect on what we know about, for example, the first pogroms against the Jews were under the Caliph of Cordoba in Spain. It didn't reflect reality. It didn't reflect accurately the history. And so I moved on to a scholar like Ibn Warwick, who was born in Pakistan, who went to the finest schools in the UK, and then rejected out of hand, Islam, the jihadic doctrine, Sharia, and he's written he's written an enormous body of work. But I think that every freedom-loving human being should read Why I Am Not a Muslim. The journey, you don't get there at once. You get there at last. There's an enormous amount of apologetics. There's an enormous amount of dissembling and scrubbing and censoring that you really, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. It took me years to get here.
Was that the first time that you became aware of this gap between reality and the positions, let's say, of the elites? Positions of journalists, professors, Hollywood, the sort of the liberal establishment, if you like. They seem to hold some things as sacrosanct, which simply don't bear scrutiny or don't relate much to reality. Was it the first time you saw that when you were learning about Islam, or were you kind of aware of that previously?
I mean,
the way they describe you is a perfect example. For instance, I mean, the narrative about who you are in the media versus the person that I'm getting to know, for instance, is remarkable.
The person that Pamela Geller is in the media is a monster. Make no mistake about that.
But in lovely shoes.
But of course, in jackets too. There is nothing that in the media about me that's even remotely accurate. The way I'm described, the work that I do, how it is described, there is absolutely, it is a morally inverted narrative, completely void of any fact. But you see, you must understand that this is what they have to do. They have to ruin, literally destroy, murder a person. And then you cannot get your message out. You see, because why attack the message? Don't attack the message. Attack the person because
you can beat a person when you have the massed ranks of the establishment aiming at them, even if you can't beat them in an open marketplace of ideas. You can't beat them on a level playing field.
No.
Your ideas are better than theirs.
Yes.
But you're a human being, and therefore you can be overpowered.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you can be overpowered, particularly when you're not given the opportunity to respond.
Yeah.
For every piece that was written about me, I have every single time written a rebuttal, whether it was the LA Times, whether it was the Washington Post. They have never, ever run my rebuttal.
Don't acknowledge.
No, you go to GellerReport.com, they're all there. But
yeah, no, I've read them.
It's a different readership. It's a different readership.
Yeah, it's not people at home. Let me ask you a slightly different question. I'm fascinated by your story, and it makes total sense to me. I get it. I imagine I might have had a similar journey if I had been a New Yorker in your circumstances. But there aren't many people who had that. I mean, there are plenty of women in your position who were in New York who saw that happen, who did not have the conversion you had. And I'm thinking specifically, given the mollycoddling and pandering to Islam and even radical Islam in the press, often from liberal Jews. Why you are one of the few who had that almost sort of a religious conversion or some kind of ideological awakening. I've never really read, maybe it's out there and it's my lack of reading, but I've never read a persuasive explanation as to why there's such a huge contingent of liberal Jews who seem to agitate against their own interests. Because when I examine your positions, and I look at your writing, I look at your career, I speak to you, your positions seem to come from a place of logic and reason and personal experience, sure. But personal experience triggered it, for sure.
Yes.
But you don't talk about that now. You talk about the stuff that's happening. You know? You talk about freedoms and the threats to them and, stuff that is real out there in the world. How is it that you seem to be, one of the only Jews in public life who gets it? These people want Israel wiped from the face of the planet, pushed into the sea.
Indeed, they do.
In every conceivable respect, the liberal establishment is working for the interests of Muslims and against the interests of Jews as a people.
Absolutely.
Why? And why are you the only one that gets it?
Well, let me say this. Left-wing Jews worship at the church of human secularism. They are, by and large, really godless. Their religion is human secularism. And we see this, by the way, across the board. We see this in the churches. The Pope is one of the great spokespeople for Islam. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the Pope say that there is no violence in the Quran and all this other incredible nonsense.
Stuff that's just obviously counterfactual.
Right.
I am not an expert on Islam like you are, but even I know what abrogation is.
Yes.
Even I know that Quranic scholars themselves say, you know, go with the ones that were revealed to Muhammad later.
Right.
And I know that means the verses when he'd become a warlord, and
Right.
the bellicose verses that subvert and supplant the earlier peaceful verses,
Yes.
you know, peace, love, and
It's
understanding.
abrogation.
Yeah,
Right.
Even I know that.
Yes.
How does the Pope get away with saying
But
this
my
stuff?
point is, this is across all religions. Even in India, you know, which has suffered under the boot of jihadic terror for centuries. I mean, they have their left-wingers. Now, interestingly enough, this is a curse that we have suffered as a people, time immemorial. I mean, if you go back in the Bible, you know, when Moses went up to get the tablets, right? And he left his people at the base of the mountain. And what did they do? The Democrats went and made a golden calf. Those were Democrats. When Moses sent 10 Jews into the promised land and said, you know, find out if it's good.
Yeah.
And, you know, 8 or 10 came back and said, oh, it's terrible, don't go there. And 2 said, it's fantastic. Those 2 were the Republicans. The 10 were the Democrats.
Okay, but
and the Jews wandered the desert for the next 40 years.
Okay, so if you're saying this goes back to what is it about the Jewish people that keep advocating against their own interests? I'm of Jewish extraction, but I was raised Catholic, so I don't really have insight into Jewish culture and politics in the same way. Partly because I wasn't raised in America, partly also because I wasn't raised by like practicing parents.
Right.
So this has been a mystery to me, and I'm like, I don't get it. Is there something I'm not getting? Because I wasn't raised Jewish. There's not that thing in my head that's like, oh, well, they completely sabotage their own interest and advocate entirely against their own, you know, existential, you know, whatever. I don't get it.
Listen, there were Jews in Germany that invited, you know, the Nazis to their charity dinners. We see churches, particularly world churches, who are, you know, aligned with the jihad force. This is something that's across all religions. And as far as
so you don't think it's unique to...
No, I think that you could point to any religion and show that they're doing the same thing. 20% of the Jews, the 25% that voted for Trump, for example, the religious Jews are completely with me. I mean, we stand as one. I get email from them all the time, you know, people at the Chabad. But the left-wing Jews, honestly, at the end of the day, are godless.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe because... proportionally speaking, Jews, because we're smarter or whatever, overrepresented in things like media. And therefore, perhaps people think that there's a particularly Jewish thing about it.
No,
like
I just think...
a particular problem with Jewish people advocating against their own interests.
I just think that Jews...
I don't want to linger on the subject too long. I was just fascinated as to why you have had this realization when so many other people in your position did not.
Right, but you see, I have Yiddishkeit, you know. I have this love for the Jewish people. Look, there are Jewish people that were not raised. I mean, as you said, you weren't practicing. They don't get it. They don't understand, you know, the necessity of Israel, and they want to assimilate. And right now, the zeitgeist is very anti-Israel. And they want to belong.
Because they want to assimilate because they don't want to repeat history.
Right. And by assimilating, they're repeating history.
Right, which is exactly what happened in Germany.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's a better answer than I've ever heard before.
But
it's still a mystery to me, but it's a better answer than I've ever heard before. The next thing I want to talk to you about is unpersoning and ejection from polite society and blacklisting, and all of the other things that you have suffered, especially since Garland, Texas, when you hosted a cartoon exhibit competition, and you were almost assassinated. Yeah. People on their way to kill you, and probably kill everybody else in the building.
Open fire.
Yep. And since then, you have been unpersoned by polite society.
Yes.
For the crime of, I don't know, provocation, bring it on yourself.
Standing for free speech.
It's the short skirt argument, right? It's like she had it coming because she went and poked she went with a big stick and whacked the side of the bee's nest, and now she's complaining about getting stung.
She had it coming because she had a vagina.
It's well, this is, the argument works for feminism and not for this. Who knows why? You've had a difficulty after Media Matters has come for you, after Garland, Texas, which ought to have been a relatively in my view, should have been an uncontroversial thing to do in America.
Yes, I agree.
Particularly in Texas. Should have been uncontroversial, but in America generally, you should be able to do it in California, for goodness sake.
Absolutely.
You've had difficulty getting a platform among mainstream media journalists unless something goes wrong when they want you in to defend yourself or to
attack.
Right. Why is that? Why do they do it?
Because the media is aligned with the jihad force. The media is notoriously leftist. And if we know anything, we know that the left loves whatever totalitarian ideology there is of the day. If it's not communism, it was Stalinism. If it wasn't Stalinism, it was the National Socialist Workers' Party, which is Nazism. Read Mein Kampf. Yes, he was a Jew hater, but he was a hard leftist. He was a socialist. Right. The idea now that they're calling Nazism
and they got
a hard
ideas
right.
from the American Democrats for their. This is Dinesh D'Souza's new book,
I don't agree with Dinesh. Don't get me started on Dinesh. I disagree with him. I don't like a lot of his philosophies. He blamed the left. He blamed 9/11 on liberals and Western culture. I don't go there with him. And I don't agree with that, by the way.
Okay.
But if anything, Hitler was inspired by the Armenian genocide. Yeah. Remember what he said about that? He said, listen, if they didn't care about the Armenians, they're not going to care about the Jews. But he was a hard leftist. He was a socialist. Yes. And the idea is that it's a system of control. Look, people say left versus right. It's really the individual versus the state. Individualism versus collectivism. Yeah. The left is collectivist. The left is statist. And America was founded on the principle of individual rights. The first moral government in the history of the world. The first moral government based on individual rights. And everything noble and magnificent that we achieved as a nation was a logical fidelity to that principle. This is what the left has been advocating against.
And this is why there's this twisted common cause between feminists and Islam, for instance.
That's exactly right.
On college campuses, you'll get Black Lives Matter, LGBT, feminist, and Muslim groups all working in unison and speaking in unison. And you hear all of their deranged conspiratorial rantings in student unions. Why? Because they're all ultimately advocating for the same thing, which is collectivism, control, and authoritarianism.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
And their primary enemy is not white people, men, Christians or straight people. Their enemy is individual liberty and freedom.
Right.
Yeah. Because
boom. Boom.
Take that one home.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah. I am in firm agreement with you on that one.
Yes.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the personal toll of doing what you do. Now, I've referred to you as brave and courageous and heroic, and you are. And many people who have those characteristics like to downplay the personal toll of the work that they do. And as conservatives and libertarians, we're not great fans of playing the victim. And we don't want to bang on about how awful our lives are. I mean, our lives are pretty good. We get to wear nice clothes and meet interesting people. And
we live in the greatest country in the world.
Indeed. But there must be some mornings when you wake up and think, let's put it like this. When it takes you 5 minutes instead of 5 seconds to get out of bed. What are those mornings like for you? And what are the things that get you out of bed? What are the things that stir you to action if you wake up in a malaise? Because look, you and I both are up against the massed ranks. We're up against every bit of firepower the establishment has, and somehow we have turned our countercultural, dissident, outsider status into an asset. We have flipped it and turned it into a virtue, which very few people are able to do, because I think you need certain personal qualities most people don't possess. What is it? I don't want you to go on about and I'm sure you wouldn't ever be seen doing so, going on about how awful it is to be Pamela Geller. But what are the things that help you shake off what can sometimes be quite a consuming sense of futility and I don't know, exhaustion maybe?
Well, firstly, let me say that I am right. I am right and I am righteous, and I never doubt myself, because I didn't get here knee jerk. I didn't get here dogmatically. I did my homework. I studied. I sought answers. I conferred with people that I respect. And so it's actually quite fabulous to be Pamela Geller. And the people that you refer to.
Glad to hear it.
Yes,
I think it's quite fabulous
it's really
being
true.
me too. I mean,
I'm sure you know.
I'm quite happy.
Yes, but I mean, the people that you refer to are very small and they're evil. And I believe that. I believe that there is good and evil. I think this attempt to say that there's no such thing is just a way of discarding a morality. And a morality means, irrationality is exalted. Anti-life, and I'm not talking about abortion. I'm talking about anti-life is exalted. And anti-real and anti-reality as well. And I know. You see, I know this.
You lived through it. I've noticed... I'm speaking as an outsider to this country. I can't claim that this has always been the case. I don't know what it would have been like for a gay Jewish immigrant with a black boyfriend in America in the 60s or 70s in the South. I don't know, right?
I don't know that it would be pretty.
No, I don't think it probably would have been. But things have changed, and the way I know that is that I was able last year to give a speech in drag. As Ivana Wall, my drag alter ego, to a room of 1,200 Louisiana Republicans and receive a standing ovation for a speech about fat shaming, which of course I said it was an entirely good thing, and actually it does work despite all the liberal journalism to the contrary. So if you want to be kind to your overweight friends, you should bully them relentlessly. That's a little tongue in cheek, but I was in drag as a Southern belle. Was.
I think it's brilliant.
No,
it's so
lovely.
Great.
On the face of it, the most absurd and like Republican repelling, tableau that you could you imagine. Standing ovation. They love me. Congressional candidate was standing in line for an autograph. So I know that the picture at least is out of date.
Yes, absolutely.
And I also noticed too, when you're talking about evil and some of the ways in which you can tell this. I've noticed traveling through America, the compassion and warmth and generosity and authenticity of Americans, Republicans and Christians and the people who are typically laughed at in real America versus the mean, vindictive, sociopathic ugliness of the coasts.
Yes.
The hypocrisy of the coasts.
Yes.
The 5 days that it has taken some of the biggest stars to denounce Harvey Weinstein. And, turns out there is a rape culture in America. We knew there was one in the Middle East. We didn't think there was one in America because there certainly isn't one on college campuses.
He's the tip of the iceberg.
And there's much worse things going on over there. And this was turned a blind eye to by people for their own professional advancement and as a way to continue to pour money into the coffers of Democrats and the Clinton Foundation.
Exactly right.
All of this has a political dimension.
It does.
All of this is tied up with politics because the people who are behaving the worst are the people most closely aligned with and the people funding the Democrats.
Yes.
And that's why they're so protective. This is remarkable to me, and I wasn't anticipating it because I don't think it's quite true of Britain. I think there's an equal level of corruption and unpleasantness on the left and the right in Britain. But the left in America is sort of uniquely evil.
They are uniquely evil.
I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, in Germany, you've got the Greens who are like batty, and you've got the centre-leftists. Yeah, I mean, they're socialists, and I think they're wrong about everything, but they're not wicked, evil people.
Yes.
There's something horrible about the left in this country, something dark and broken about them.
Let me say this. You would need something dark. You would need something evil to defeat something as good as freedom, as good as Americanism. This idea, this American experiment, this exalted civilization, which is exactly what it is, would not be taken down with a mealy mouth, sort of well-intended foe.
Yeah.
You need a real evil.
Yeah, if liberals were like conservatives, pussies, if you give the language.
Yes.
Timid.
Yes. Weak.
Afraid, weak,
spineless.
Easily beaten, spineless.
Gutless.
Gutless. Yeah, we
throw
go
a
gutless.
little bit in the mix here.
If they were like Republicans,
Right.
And they wanted to write essays about things instead of doing things because it's safer and it's easier. And you'll never upset your investors and you'll never upset the people who fund you by not taking risks. And if you start a think tank and publish policy papers about it, you've done something.
Yes.
Versus those of us who are on college campuses out there, staging Muhammad drawing cartoons. What were you thinking? Like, you're the bravest person I've ever met. Like, what were you thinking? But, versus people actually go out and do something. And I think some of the opprobrium we get from the right, by the way, comes from that jealousy and maybe guilt. That they're not doing anything and they hate the people who do.
Right.
Because they see themselves reflected in us and they don't like what they see.
No.
But, there'd be no ability to change America for the worse if liberals were like Republicans.
No.
But they're not. They're powerful. One of the ways in which they express that power, the smartest insight, I think, ever in politics is that culture is where it's at. Andrew Breitbart's version of this was that politics was downstream from culture. We saw just recently maybe the first ever proper nice little jab at Islam in Curb Your Enthusiasm. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. I thought they were heading in firmly the other direction.
Yes.
Talk to us about, what was your response when you saw, it's Larry David in the episode has a fatwa placed on him. You see, sometimes the gods smile down on us, things align nicely. I get accused of being a neo-Nazi 5 days after I marry a black guy. I don't have to do anything.
No.
You have a book coming out called Fatwa, and lo and behold, Curb Your Enthusiasm has a fatwa storyline. What did you think when you saw it? And do you hope that more people are going to... Do you think people will be emboldened by that to tell jokes about what is a hilarious subject?
My first thought was, Baruch Hashem, praise Hashem, because this is something we know in Hollywood is never discussed. Mm-hmm. Terrorists are always Russian or Serbian or some, unknown nationality.
That hasn't had terrorists since the 60s.
It's just absurd on its face. And I thought it was marvelous. I thought it was fantastic. A, because it's funny. B,
it's nicely done, isn't it? The Ayatollah's funny. It's funny.
He made it funny. Look, to live under a fatwa is so not funny. I'm just going to tell you, it's not funny. But listen, everything can be made fun of, and First Amendment, and it was funny. And what I particularly enjoyed was the fact that when he, showed, for example, the Ayatollah in Iran, he didn't use like a fake narrative. Muslims across the world, we're going to kill. I mean, he wasn't afraid to use the word Muslims. He wasn't afraid to use the word fatwa.
It wasn't kind of
it wasn't
a
whitewashed.
satirized version.
It was not whitewashed.
It was what the Ayatollah would have said.
Yeah, it's what they say. It's what they say. And it was delicious because we're talking about something that is not talked about in the mainstream. Part of the thing about the reason why I named the book Fatwa, I mean, I could have named it, death threat or, under death, but...
And if you'd gone to one of the big 5 publishers, you would have had to. They would not have allowed you to publish a book called Fatwa.
No, and I didn't take the book to any of the 5 publishers. I took the book to you because I knew you would be brave enough. And it takes an enormous amount of bravery because, look, I was told, but after Garland, that nobody would publish me for fear that their publishing house would be blown up.
Maybe I'll get a fatwa, and then I won't be so jealous.
Then we can party together.
Well, then I'll only be
with our armies.
Then I'll only be envious for one reason, which is your wardrobe. And then I won't have 2 reasons to hate you.
Yes,
what is that great quote? There's nothing so painful as the success of friends.
Yes, it's true. That was Morrissey, right? That was Morrissey.
I think so.
Yes, that was a great song. Yes.
see you out there.
We hate when our friends become successful.
Surrounded by security with your fatwa.
And they're so
Screw
studly.
You, Pamela.
And they're so fabulous.
I have to hire a 16-person Navy SEAL team for Berkeley just to feel like
just to compete.
Competition is expensive.
Yes.
No,
very expensive.
You mentioned something actually I was going to come to later, but let's talk about it now. The reality of living under a fatwa. They don't have an expiration date, as you told me recently. This is a Damoclesian sword hanging over your head. At any moment, any Muslim or anyone, anywhere, could turn themselves into a hero for hundreds of millions of people.
Yes.
By coming for you.
Yes.
By hurting you. By killing you.
By killing me. In the most gruesome way possible. The more gruesome, the more exalted.
Right. ISIS has demonstrated that for us, what we all suspected, which is the more bloody and savage.
The more righteous.
The more righteous, yeah. Although we shouldn't use savage because CNN. I saw a long interview with you on CNN where you were accused of being a racist for using the word savage to describe the acts of terrorists.
You can't make this stuff up.
That's the real story. This is just to digress briefly. Something you've been a victim of, and that I've noticed is the debasement of public debate into an argument about words.
Yes.
Because the left believes that words are violence. So safe spaces on college campuses and all the rest of it. They want to dissolve the barriers between speech and action because they want to legitimize their own violent responses to our words, to our ideas. But some of them actually do think that words are violent. And so the debate about drawing cartoons is analogous to this. The debate about, using certain words. The left thinks that if you fix the way people speak, you fix the problems in the world. And what happens is the actual problems go unresolved.
Of course.
Because you've managed to bully everyone into talking about them in the right language, but you haven't actually done anything about them.
No.
And this is the left's weakness. If the right's weakness is talking instead of acting, the left's weakness is thinking that you can... I think the left's primary weakness in this country is thinking that if you bully everyone into saying the right thing in public, that their thoughts will follow. If you make people use the language you want, wear the clothes you want, talk about the ideas you want, act politically correct, that you somehow are changing how they think. You're not. You're just storing up resentment and hatred, and it's going to explode. For instance, in the form of a Trump presidency, because you bullied and cajoled people for 30 years into these stupid speech codes and political correctness and all the rest of it. You haven't changed what they think. You've just forced them to behave with false consciousness in real life.
And many of the ideas are wrong. Opposition to jihad terror is not Islamophobia.
No.
So a lot of the ideas, it's not just changing the way people think. A lot of the ideas are evil and wrong.
Yes.
Okay.
As a sort of consequence of this culture that they have, the consequence of this this control they have over language, and focusing the debate on language, and you refuse to use politically correct language.
I will
call
not.
Your book what you want to call your book. You'll put whatever words you want on your ads.
Yes, I will. It's called the truth.
And thank goodness that you're around to do it and see it through in the courts and protect the First Amendment. But this eventually filters its way down to politics and affects your life in all sorts of different ways, not just the personal toll of being under a fatwa, but for instance, you get banned from countries, from entire countries, because what? You use the wrong language about Islam. You're not a terrorist. You never attacked anybody that we know about.
I've never been arrested.
You have a clean criminal record. All you have done. Well, I don't know if that actually. They're two different claims.
No,
I won't ask you about that.
I have a clean criminal record. I do.
Everyone had a 20s. Okay, there's no judgment, no shame. But all you have done is speak and write.
Yes.
And for speaking, and never to my knowledge, and I've
never incited to violence.
Exactly.
Ever.
I've read exactly where I was going. I've read you for a long time. I read you very closely. I read your book, publishing it. But you've never incited anyone to violence.
Never.
You've never advocated for violence. Quite the opposite.
No.
You have had ideas.
Southern Poverty Law Center members have.
Well, they
have.
And inspired shootings.
Actual violent attacks.
Nothing has happened. The worst thing that has happened as a result of your words is some people drew some cartoons. But you've been banned from entire countries. The United Kingdom, I'm ashamed to say, said something along the mealy-mouthed, excuse my language, horseshit lines of not conducive to the public good.
Yes. The UK banned me, saying I was not conducive to the public good, and they feared that Muslims would get violent. So once again...
punishing you for being a victim.
The actions of the other. The completely irrational and savage, other in this case. It is shocking, particularly because they allow so many jihad preachers in, so many hate preachers in.
You got the hook-handed cleric, Abu Hamza?
Yeah.
Now, I think maybe he's been sent back now, but he was there for decades, for a long time.
I mean, I have it on my site. I'd have to look it up. The fact is, I did sue the Crown. Mm-hmm. I did sue to have the ban lifted. I spent upwards of $50,000, $60,000. And of course, at the end of the day, the doors get closed on the old national security canard. We can't. What national security? And when we got documents, much like under the Freedom of Information Act, but in the UK, it's called duty of candor. We got some documents in the court case under the duty of candor. What was cited as well was my unequivocal support for Israel. And it was interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it's in the documents. And it was interesting because when it was going back and forth between these agencies, they said, listen, there are a couple of American presidents that feel that way. Don't use that. Don't cite that in the public explanation.
Yeah.
So you see, it speaks volumes.
Presumably every American president, at least on paper.
Yes.
You know, maybe it's not Obama's private position.
It certainly wasn't his. It wasn't his shining hour.
It was his public position.
Yes, it was.
It's every American president's public position.
It's a shared value system.
Of maybe most of the country.
Yes. No, it is not maybe most of the country. It is most of the country. If you look at the recent polls and all the polls over the decades, listen, because it's a shared value system. It has nothing to do with Jewish or Christian or this.
Skin color or
it's
geography.
Democracy.
It's democracy. Yeah.
It's the only democracy in the Middle East, and it's the only place where that's safe for Christians now.
I have no idea about that. That takes a lot to shock me, but that is shocking.
Yes, I was surprised as well.
This is one of the many reasons I find common cause with you, is that I get punished for being the victim of the other side's bad behavior too. We were in Berkeley recently, ended up being a bit of a mess. Again, one of the worst reported on things that I have ever seen in my entire career. But the point is that these universities create the Antifa problem. They create the by any means necessary problem. They play footsie with them. In Berkeley's case, they leaked a speaker list that included Ann Coulter and Steve Bannon's names, with the sole purpose, it cannot be for any other reason, of drumming up opposition to the event and giving domestic terrorists a heads up about the event.
Exactly.
So and kicking off, a scandal about it. There's no possible charitable interpretation of what they did. And then they asked me for $65,000 just as a security deposit. A mere $65,000. And that wasn't all the money they wanted. And then kept it for weeks and never gave us the halls. With the result that our main speakers dropped out, as now everybody now knows.
Yes.
What everybody doesn't know is that's the reason. And so what they're doing is they're creating this they're making it expensive, terrifying, complicated, and impossible to be a conservative in public life.
Yes.
And then charging us for the privilege.
Yes. Yes.
What the hell?
Listen,
it's so amazing.
It reminds me of Garland. With Garland, Texas, when the Muslim leaders held their stand with the Prophet, they said they were afraid and that they needed security. And the police provided an enormous amount of security.
I don't suppose there was a bill after that, was there?
There was no bill, and there was no threat. Now, when we went to do our event, it was the first time in my history, and in America that I know of, that we got a bill. How do I know this? How do I know that they weren't billed and we were billed over $10,000? Because I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request, and that's how I found out they were not billed. And we were. What does that tell you? It tells you this, too, is a form of Sharia. This is special rights for a special class, the special class being Muslim.
And there's no justification for it. There's no grounds for it.
No.
There's no reason to suppose that Muslims are are a greater physical threat. There's no numbers that show that.
No, just the contrary.
Exactly.
FBI statistics show that the majority of these hate crimes are against Jews. You don't see anybody talking about that. And it's what,
and
11...
a Jew staging
yes.
It's a provocative thing. But
it's not a provocative thing. The jihadists have made it a provocative thing. Why are we buying into that? It's a cartoon. First of all, the winning cartoon, which was by a former Muslim, was a studly Muhammad who looked, if I have to tell you, little handsome, little something. And he's saying, you can't draw me. And then you see the cartoonist's hand saying, that's why I draw you. This is the justification for a death sentence. First,
you're right.
It's political speech. It's the most protected
not
speech under the First Amendment. It's absurd.
I think it's different to say. You're right about that. Thank you for catching it, because I think it's fair to say that you knew there'd be a reaction to it, but it is also at the same time true that it should not and it should not be provocative, and it was not provocative in the context of the First Amendment in America.
We live in America.
Right. I think that's reasonable.
We live in the greatest country in the world.
That's not to say that you didn't anticipate a response to this, but
I get a response to everything I do. Every ad I run...
It's ludicrous to suggest it is not well within your rights as an American under the First Amendment to do so.
It's shocking to be having this conversation, but this is 21st century America, and we are.
And we both get this. It's like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Actually, that's exactly why you should.
That's exactly.
Because if we don't, sooner or later, nobody will be allowed to.
Yeah, and that's where we're going.
That I think is completely reasonable. It's completely reasonable. Let's talk then about, I say you won't be allowed to, First Amendment, the status of the First Amendment, the status of this country's relationship with Islam. Let's talk about the Trump administration.
Okay.
I was quite keen on Trump because his Muslim ban is not a Muslim ban, but I'd be fine with it if it was. I'd probably take a harder line position on that than you, I'm guessing, a little bit. That has been sort of on and off and on and off, and it looks like we're getting somewhere with that. Trump's been criticized for saying he's going to clamp down on the press, which some people have interpreted as an assault on the First Amendment. What's your assessment in respect to free speech and Islam of the Trump presidency so far?
First, I just want to say clamp down on the press. It's nonsense, and they know it's nonsense. They don't just like getting it back. They can dish it out, but they can't take it. That's all that he's doing. He's not shutting down any press. He's giving it back, and I like him for that. Look, I was not originally, he was not my candidate. He attacked me viciously after Garland. It showed me it's not personal. It showed me he had a shallow understanding of the issue. But he also showed he was a quick study, and subsequent to that, he said some very good things about Muslim immigration, the hijra, and various other related issues. His presidency has been disappointing. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't understand McMaster. Why he not only keeps him, but, has vested so much power into him. He's gotten rid of really some of the best people like Flynn. Bannon left, which was, I thought was, for me, that was the line in the sand. Up until that point, I had one thing to say when I went to sleep at night. Steve's there.
Uncle Steve.
Uncle Steve is there, and if Uncle Steve is there, we can all sleep better at night.
This is my second great invention after first coining "Daddy" for Trump. Now I called Steve Bannon Uncle Steve in a single quote to a journalist, and they went crazy about it. They hate humanizing humans. They hate
when we're humans, because their whole mission by objective is to make us monsters.
Unperson and dehumanize.
Is to make us monsters, and that's what they do. And so. I am deeply concerned. I am hoping that at some point he has his political awakening. And he says, look, I tried to play ball. I tried to get it done within the political framework that is this country. It didn't work.
You're all out.
Uncle Steve.
Come back, Uncle Steve.
Come on down.
Okay, so I think we're in broadly the same place on the Trump administration. Get rid of them all. Bring back Uncle Steve.
Drain the Trump swamp.
Oh,
please.
That one's going to sting.
Well, listen,
that one's gonna sting.
He's got a lot that has to be done, and he's got to have the right generals. Look, they mean to take him down. They mean to take him down anyway. So if you're going to go down doing the right thing. Don't go down compromised and weak. Don't do it that way.
They say that all political careers end in failure. It's a cliche they say in Britain a lot. And it was true up until Nigel Farage, who had advocated for Brexit tirelessly for a decade or more or whatever, announced that he was leaving politics when the Brexit referendum went through. And I thought, wow, this is the first time I think I have ever been aware in history or currently where any politician has won something and then gracefully exited the field of battle rather than grinding on to eventual dismal failure and universal hatred. I thought Trump might be the same, and now I'm not so sure. I don't think he likes being there very much, do you?
Listen, you can't run for the position and then not like it. Sorry, that's just not an option, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't think he likes it very much.
I mean, he ran as a fighter. Even though people may have had issues with some of the things he said or some of the things he did, I supported him once he got the nomination unequivocally. He ran on a platform, and he owes it to his base to stay true to that platform. It's just that simple. I don't care if he likes it or not. This is not.
Public life is about duty.
Yeah. It's not a celebrity contest. It's not a popularity contest.
Maybe he thought it was.
But it's not.
But it isn't.
And it's
now
enormous.
It's time to step. This is a test of character. I think,
heavy is the head that wears the crown, and his head is wearing it, and he's got to, he has to do right by what he promised us.
Do you think that if Garland were to happen today, that he would have said more positive things about it?
I wonder, because we know that
I feel like he probably would.
Let me say this: if you recall, in 1989, when the Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa against Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie, who was an avowed liberal. Salman Rushdie, who was an opponent, a very vocal opponent of Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
When that fatwa was issued, She called him to 10 Downing Street, and she said, listen, we may not be on the same political side, but we are both on the side of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
You will have coverage.
Mm-hmm.
We will protect you
Mm-hmm.
for as long as we have to.
Mm-hmm.
This was a magnificent moment.
Yeah.
And it showed that this freedom, this understanding of freedom, transcended parties.
Can't imagine the political left doing that for one of us. And
President Obama?
indeed, given the opportunity, none of them have.
President Obama not only said nothing, this is a man that on September the 12th, 2012, September 18th, a week after the Benghazi attack, got up in front of the world, got up in front of the UN and said, the future does not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. Which is why I believe there was a stand-down order given in Vegas. Vegas, subliminal. There was a stand-down order given in Garland. They knew about it. They went on the planning. The FBI was there. Why didn't they have a SWAT team there? Why didn't they have one FBI agent there with a gun?
It's a remarkable statement for him to have made.
It is.
And I think it reveals sort of everything about the attitudes
I
of
think
that
they
side
wanted
of the
something
aisle.
to happen to us.
Yeah, I mean, it
would have had a chilling effect on freedom of speech.
I think maybe that's why he didn't say anything about you, because even Obama realized that for the sitting president of the United States to effectively come out against the First Amendment would have been difficult for him.
Yes, I think so.
Even when I went to the press briefing at the White House and asked Josh Earnest about when I got banned from Twitter, I was talking about these companies have such a huge monopoly on public life, and there's no alternative. If you get banned from Twitter, where do you go? I was asking these questions, and he said something interesting. He said this was late in the presidency, but even so, the president will be the first to affirm that a commitment to First Amendment principles is a prerequisite for successful businesses in this area, which is kind of a big statement for a Democrat politician to make, even through a.
But they're not living it.
No, they're not. And actually, you can speculate all you like, and you can be, have partisan positions on this, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And history has shown, Margaret Thatcher embracing the enemy in service of higher goals.
Magnificent moment. Magnificent moment.
Not the same. And you didn't even get support from your own side, which is the most shocking thing of all. And one of the most shocking things to me coming to America has been seeing the bravest street fighters and activists and journalists and sometimes provocateurs, but talking about myself, and warriors like you getting no cover from their own side. It's clear to me when I listen to you in radio interviews, I can sort of hear the audience cheering. Like Republicans and libertarians in America love you. The first thing everybody said to me about the book was, "Oh, America loves her. It's gonna go great." But from your own side, from the conservative establishment, you've got the same thing I have. Trying to speak at CPAC.
Very, very, very cold. Look, they are weak and they are gutless and they are spineless, and that's a fact. CPAC, it's unforgivable. I mean, that you would not, the font of my ideas comes from individual rights. Right now, the gravest threat that we face comes from this red-green alliance. The threats to our freedom comes from this leftist Islamic alliance. No matter what side of, the issues you're on, you have to see that that's a great threat to our freedom. And the idea that they would really shut me out, and do they really think it's going to make them safer? It's like that poem by Martin Niemöller, who said, first they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't do anything. I'm paraphrasing.
First they came for Pamela Geller.
Yes.
And next the GOP.
Yeah. And you see that.
Presumably you have friends in who are establishment Republicans, maybe acquaintances.
Yes.
How does it make you feel? Because I've experienced some of this over the last year myself. How does it make you feel to see people kind of go silent and not offer public support when you thought they probably should, or definitely thought they should? Or, I perceive you as somebody going out to fight the fights that nobody else will. Maybe the ones that no one else has the stomach for. Maybe the ones that nobody else has the resources or resolve or determination or grit to do.
Thank you.
I mean it. That's fine that they don't have that, but they should at least write a nice column about you. They should at least have your back in the marketplace of ideas, in the press. And they don't very often.
No.
How does it make you feel?
I feel sorry for them, because my greatest inner strength comes from the fact that I have the courage of my convictions. this is sucor that I cannot possibly explain. It feeds everything. If people say, where does it come from? It comes from that. And they don't have it. They don't have the courage of their convictions. They're not real. And honestly...
Maybe because they know a lot of what they say. It's not going to help the country. You know, there's a lot of self-serving
That's
nonsense.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
They're not real. And at the end of the day, they've done me a favor. Because what they've done is they've taken off their mask. And we find underneath that mask is a second-hander, is an imposter.
Yeah.
Is, as my father would say, a full of shitnik.
I like that. I have a couple of shorter questions, things that I'm interested in, things that people wanted me to ask you. Have you ever drawn Muhammad?
Other than a stick figure, no. But
Just
only
a stick figure.
because I can't draw.
No, I can't draw either.
No, but I really can't draw.
After Charlie Hebdo, I wanted to publish a cartoon myself, and I tried, and then I was like, there's a big reason why this isn't going to happen. It came at
It's not my skill set.
My dad has like a fine art, graduate fine art degree,
so you have
and I thought maybe I'd pick it up by osmosis or something,
Yes.
but apparently not. No.
No,
Southern Poverty Law Center calls your organization a hate group.
Yes. Pot meat kettle.
Yeah.
Pot meat kettle.
Isn't it?
And Apple is raising money for them. I mean, this is a machine.
It's on our iPhones. It's like, would you like to donate?
Yeah,
no!
It's crazy. No. This is a smear hate machine, whose members have attacked, conservative leaders, tried to assassinate conservative leaders. It's just shocking. And again, it's the same thing like with the media, going to a terror-tied group like CARE as the imprimatur of legitimacy for Muslim advocacy, okay? It's like going to the Nazi party for the opinions of the German people.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. They are a ridiculous but very dangerous group solely because they're being given this imprimatur of legitimacy by important organizations.
Yeah. What are the limits of free speech? The current Supreme Court position is that you cannot directly incite crime. Otherwise, you can pretty much say what you want.
Agreed.
I think that's pretty much good enough.
I mean, I love when people say to me, you can't scream fire in a crowded theater. And I say, but what if it's on fire?
Yeah, maybe it is on fire.
It is on fire.
Most people know that you don't talk about your personal life. And I don't want to go into detail about your home life or your personal life. But I can understand, I think people by this point in the interview are going to know perfectly well why you don't. But I think they're also going to have got a bit more of a window into you, even if your family and your home life is out of bounds, and I understand entirely why it is. If there's somebody watching who has only previously heard of you from CNN headlines, who is now intrigued to know more, what would you tell them about, let's say, the one or the two biggest things that people get wrong about you? The ways in which you're misrepresented the worst, the things that sting. Because obviously, I mean, I know you have rhino hide like I do. But you have to. But every once in a while, something does sting. And for me, it's, when they characterize me as an apologist for something I'm actually the victim of. And I'm made so angry by the hypocrisy and the cruelty of it. What would you say to people watching to understand you a little better? The things that have really stung that you'd like to correct the record on, the things that have got to you, even if only a little bit?
Well, I would like to say that the things that they have gotten wrong is everything. The thing that stings is hater, because I'm a lover.
Yeah.
I'm a lover, and the reason why I fight is I fight for art, I fight for music, I fight for love. Even now, doing this work 10, 15 years, every Friday night, I have Friday night music, and it's everything from, Johnny Hartman or Coltrane or the Smiths or Billie Holiday or everything from my youth. And then on Saturday night, it's always an old movie, because that to me is the great American, apart from jazz.
You have a routine that's stable, huh?
What was that?
You have a routine that's stable.
Yes,
like Fridays and Saturday night.
And Saturday night is an old movie, because I think this is the great
interesting to me.
American genre. I know that everyone likes to take credit for it in Europe, but they're wrong. And, you know,
anything after 1883 is trash as far as I'm concerned. So, you know, whatever.
But that's really what they get wrong. And of course, you know, the private life, for me, I would love to talk more about my private life or the people in my life, but of course I cannot.
Yeah.
I cannot, because I will not put anyone beside myself in jeopardy. I choose to do this. This is my choice. And I know I put myself out there strictly because I stand in defense of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I am but a proxy in this war. What happens to me is what happens in large or small part by every American that takes this stand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I wrote this book,
mm-hmm.
because I have seen the future, brother. It is murder. To quote Leonard Cohen, another favorite musician, poet of mine. And the future is going to be bloody and brutal, and I owe it to our children and our children's children to fight this war. So when they say, Daddy or Mommy, what did you do during the Great War?
Yeah.
My conscience is clear.
I see you as a warrior, acutely cognizant of your place in a larger culture war, in the war for Western civilization. You understand your role in it, and you fight ferociously and very effectively for it. I'm only sorry there aren't more people like you and more people backing you up. But at least it provides you with a good, a nice open market advantage. See,
yes, it's true. Run a race when you're the only one. You can only win.
You can only win. Well,
or lose.
Both, but at least you were the only one people were watching.
Yes.
I've come to know you a little bit over the last few months, and I loved the answer that you just gave, because if I were to think about our interactions, you are a lover, not a hater. You're a delightful, funny, interesting person to be around, and it's in such distinction to the way that you're described. I hope that people will read the book and come to know that for themselves. And this interview, I think, has given people a little window into a person that the media never really treats as a human being. The book is Fatwa, Hunted in America. It's out on the 1st of November this year. Get it now on Amazon. You probably know the URLs better than I do. Is it gellerbook.com?
It is gellerbook.com, and that's with a G-E-L-L-E, not Sarah.
Not Sarah Michelle Gellar, who's my other favorite Gellar.
Yes, exactly. I don't know how well she does in the book writing business.
I don't suppose she's written more than a few sentences in her life.
Captions.
But she did very nice. She did very well in Buffy.
She did.
And Cruel Intentions, wonderful.
And fatwabook.org.
She's only the second most fabulous Gellar, however.
She is. She is. Listen, I want to keep the country free for those Gellar.